Well, welcome to Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs. I'll be your host today, and we're going to be talking about buffalo. I want to remind you first, though, that this is an interactive program. The whole point of it is to be able to talk to different people about different things and to have a conversation, not just a couple of talking heads, but we want everyone to be involved in the conversation. If you have questions, maybe something comes to mind, make a note or put it in the chat if you feel shy about talking live or showing your face or something like that. If you have those reservations, there's still a place for you. So please feel free to drop something in the chat. And if you have a question, comments, and particularly if you have some kind of experience relevant to our conversation. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about buffalo. Many of you may not know about how many buffalo there were, particularly in this region at one time, and about the concerted effort to kill off the buffalo as a way of starving out the people, and also to impact them emotionally because of their connection to the buffalo, both not only in terms of sustenance, but in terms of who they were as a people. And that concerted effort to kill off the buffalo. And I think that it's relevant to know that, to start to understand some of the trauma that Native people have undergone, not just the attack on themselves, but everything that was relevant and sacred to them. Everything from carving up their mountains that were sacred and taking the land, all of those kind of things. And I think it's important for us to start to understand and grapple with this, because without knowing that, we don't understand the depth of the pain that people have and how hard it is to cope with their present situation. And their past cannot be disconnected from their present. Neither can our past be connected from our present. So we're going to be talking about not only what's happened with the buffalo, but more important, what's happening with them now, the efforts that are being made to bring the buffalo back. And that should be something that's important to all of us. And with us today, we have Dr. Trudy Ecoffey. I want to say it in a French way, but she'll probably say it in her way. And she is working with the Tanka project. No, my tongue is going to trip up and say that wrong. But to talk about the Tanka project, to talk about what they're doing to bring the buffalo back. Welcome, Trudy.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'm happy to be here, and I hope it's raining here. I'm in south near Sioux City, Iowa, actually on a buffalo transfer from the Nature Conservancy. So I'm kind of in the back roads. So I hope the rain and the noise doesn't impart anybody hearing what we have to say today. But I'm thankful to be here and love to talk about what we're doing.
Okay, great. So tell us a little bit first about who is Trudy and how did you come to be riding buffalo?
Right. Well, I grew up in central Nebraska, actually on a cattle ranch, but over the year and when I was a little girl, we found some buffalo bones in the middle of a pasture when my dad was doing a hill, trying to make a road down a hillside. And ever since then, I was about 9 or 10 years old, and ever since then, I was completely intrigued with these animals. After I found out that later on in schooling and the history that 30 to 60 million buffalo were actually slaughtered, and they used to roam the prairies of not only Nebraska but South Dakota, North Dakota, and actually the entire United States and Canada. And I've always had a passion for them. And as I went through my degree programs and things, and lived on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation for 25 years and was a wildlife biologist there, working with the tribal buffalo program for the Ogallala Sioux tribe. Um, I just, it's just something that has been a great passion of mine. And in recent years, I was working for the United States government through the Natural Resource Conservation Service as a tribal liaison. Had kind of left the wildlife biology world a little, and had this opportunity by Carleen Hunter and Mark Tilson, who are the founders of Tanka, Native American Natural Food, and Tanka Fund, and asked me to be their executive director. And I was completely honored. So it's been a long journey, but I feel I'm doing the passion that I feel like that I was, you know, thankfully given the opportunity to do. And so now, being the ED of Tanka Fund, it's been an exciting journey for the last 4 years.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Tonka Fund?
Yeah,
And
so
what
I mentioned, yeah, go ahead. Thanks. Yeah, I mentioned Carleen Hunter and Mark Tilson. They developed the brand Tonka, the Tonka bar. It was based off of a traditional food source. Some people call it pemmican, some people call it, the Lakota call it wasna. They developed that on the Pine Ridge Reservation in southwest South Dakota. And they wanted this to be an all native brand, an all native food product that was made by native people and produced by native people. And they found out early on that, and this product is made basically by fruit, a native fruit, and some type of meat. So the meat that they were using was buffalo or bison meat. I'll use those two words interchangeably. Bison being the scientific name, buffalo being the common name. And actually they were using cranberries because it's more readily available than maybe some of your native fruits that are grown in South Dakota. And they found out early on that there was very few animals that were being raised by native people. There's quite a few animals being raised by tribal, at least I think like 80 tribes across North America have animals that they're raising tribally for local foods, but they found very few that they could purchase for the product. And so they developed Tanka Fund because they wanted to help families and communities, give them the support to raise buffalo for their livelihood, for their economy, for their land. And therefore they developed Tanka Fund as their nonprofit arm to Native American natural foods.
and so how does the Tonka Fund? I think I missed that. How do they work, and what do they do?
Right. So what our mission is to restore buffalo to the land, lives, and economy of Native people. And some of the things that we do a lot of fundraising to be able to bring funds in and to re-grant dollars back to projects, family and communities that are raising buffalo. So we do a lot of fundraising for them, trying to give them re-grant dollars for their fencing, their infrastructures, for equipment, for land purchases, land leases, and whatever they need. So we've thankfully been able through our fundraising efforts to give significant dollars to, right now we're working with 19 projects, currently 2 in Texas, 2 in Oklahoma, 1 in Minnesota, and most all the rest are in South Dakota, and all on reservations except a couple. Obviously, Texas does not have reservations, but there are a couple families there that are raising bison, and a community project called the Texas Tribal Buffalo Project. And so we support them with dollars as we can. We've been thankful for some great funding through the Bush Foundation, Northwest Area Foundation, Cedar Tree Foundation, and then just fundraising efforts. But also part of that is the technical assistance. You know, some of these families and communities have been have had buffalo for quite a lot of years, and some are just beginning. And so, but either if they've been at it a long time or a very short time, we want to be able to provide them the technical assistance so that they have the information they need to raise these animals in the best care that they can in the environment that we're in. Yeah, so just coming from the Broken Kettle grassland preserve here in Iowa, um, we're getting animals to transfer from there. The Nature Conservancy, they're part of the Nature Conservancy family, providing the technology and the help to be able to transfer those animals from the Nature Conservancy successfully. So we also try to find resources such as that. And the Nature Conservancy is giving those animals willingly and freely to increase the sustainability of the projects we're working with.
Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with the Nature Conservancy? What are the kind of things that the support that they give you, and what's your connection with them?
Right. So several years ago, we were approached by the Nature Conservancy about possibly transferring some animals to some of the projects. They reached out to us. They themselves are a nonprofit, and of course they're worldwide, but they have, I don't know exactly how many conservancies have buffalo in the United States, but quite a few. And they felt in their long history of doing conservation that they wanted to reach out to the Native communities to see how they could better support them and the restoration of buffalo, of bison. And they had been giving some animals to the Intertribal Buffalo Council, which is a council of tribally owned projects. But they also wanted to reach out to the family and communities. So they contacted Tanka Fund and said, we would like to also give Tanka Fund animals to be distributed to the projects we work with. We're expanding on that relationship now, possibly working with prescribed burning efforts, you know, for the health of the land, youth programming, training, a lot of great things that the Conservancy does. So that's the relationship we're building. We're still working on that to see what other avenues that we can explore, but they've been a great partner with this buffalo restoration piece, and we're very excited. This year, we'll probably be getting in the neighborhood of over 250 head of buffalo, 40 coming from Broken Kettle, where I'm close to here now. And we're just really excited for them to trust us in our efforts to be able to get those animals safely into the hands and the care of Native people that are working on buffalo restoration.
You mentioned at some point that you have some connection also with the state of Minnesota. How are you working with them?
So yes, Minnesota State, the Department of Natural Resources also reached out to Tanka Fund. They too see the need and the social justice behind returning buffalo back to the Native communities. So they have several state parks that support animals, buffalo, and they reached out to us earlier this summer to say we would like to give some of those animals to Tanka Fund to also be able to distribute to the projects that we're working with. So we're excited that we'll be receiving some animals from the Minneopa State Park, which is near Mankato, Minnesota, and we'll be going to one of our projects in Minnesota. The Native Wise LLC will be receiving those animals. They are the first of the Fond du Lac tribal people that have reintroduced buffalo back to those homelands, and so we're excited with that. Red Lake Reservation is also helping with that transfer, so we're excited to be partnering with them as well. So it's a group effort, and yeah, we're just excited that Minnesota state is, you know, recognizing, you know, maybe to do, as you spoke about, a wrong that is being righted to some degree because of the mass slaughters that happened and what happened to the Native communities. So yeah, we're very excited about that as well.
So tell us a little bit about where the buffalo are going. You mentioned, okay, you're giving them to or helping private families be able to participate in the project. How is that helping the kind of the overall goal? Tell us the interconnectivity of that. Tell us about
You
that.
bet. Yeah, sure. So some of the private families that we're working with, and Native communities are extension of their families, right? When I say a family, I'm not just talking about a mom and dad and a few children. We're talking about grandparents and aunties and uncles and cousins and relatives that have been adopted. So when I talk about a family project, it's probably larger than maybe mainstream would think of it as. So um, when we help a project that is family orientated like that, they all have it's all culturally based. Can't say any of the projects we work with aren't culturally based. So and the spiritually based. But I think also they are looking for avenues to increase revenue, their economics, and also the health of the land. Um, so talking a little bit about the land, Buffalo, we feel do a great resource to the land and the grasses and to the vegetation and the wildlife. So for these families, that's really important to bring that diversity back in. And then on the economic ends of it, some way to support their family by being able to produce some kind of meat product, ecotourism, um, or maybe replacing a revenue such of cattle or some other livestock. And they want to explore that relationship deeper on that basis. And then with the community projects that we work with, those are larger than even the families. That I'll point out a couple, one at the Rock Creek District on the Standing Rock Reservation here in South Dakota is a community on a district that bought some land that was once tribal land, but then was sold to non-tribal people for many years and was grazed for cattle. The district was able to buy that land back and that ranch back and are slowly reintroducing buffalo back to that project. They have many community members that work there, go there for ceremonial purposes, doing local foods and harvesting. They have a youth program where the youth can go out there and do internships and work with the animals and on the land. And so those are some of the projects that we work with. And yeah, all of them have different ideas and thoughts about, but all truly interested in that relationship with those animals, the being relatives again.
So, how many animals are we talking about in a year? Would you
Yeah,
say?
right. Right now are probably combined with all of our projects, we're probably looking at anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 animals. Doesn't seem like a lot compared to what there once was on the landscape, but it's a start. Our goal originally for Tanka Fund was to be 1 million acres and 100,000 buffalo. We've been in existence. We kind of really had our 9th anniversary a few weeks ago, but really we didn't really get things off ground until about 4 or 5 years ago, where we started making the fund, hired an executive director. We have a staff of 5, actually soon to be 6. We have a marketing director. We have a range technician. We have some technical service providers. We have a business manager. So I went from 2020 from a staff of 1 to now a staff of almost 6. And we're working with South Dakota State University on some projects for Climate Smart and the climate outreach. So it's bigger than just maybe putting animals back on the land. It's about the preservation of those animals and of that land and of a way of thinking for the people.
I'm going to open it up right now to our panel here and see if anyone has questions, comments. Have you ever heard of buffalo? uh, Anybody?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
On the land that you purchased, I think you said Standing Rock, and they were grazing cattle on that land before. You mentioned about raising the fertility. When you put buffalo on the same land that cattle was on, how do you graze them? Is it the new rotational grazing? Are buffalo better for the land than cattle, or is it the amount of buffalo you run on the land?
Right. You graze about the same amount of animals on per acre of buffalo and cattle. And I know a lot of great cattle producers that do a great job with their grazing rotation and their management of their animals. We feel that buffalo or bison naturally do their own rotational grazing. They do a little better job of you know, utilizing the pastures and the place. Like Rock Creek does have some divided pastures where there are rotating animals around to some degree, but for the most part, using water sources and that kind of thing to entice the animals to be, to move around, they do a really great job of doing that. And I was just talking too about with the one of the managers at the Broken Kettle this morning about the Nature Conservancy, after reintroducing buffalo there, seeing the increase of vegetation diversity and wildlife diversity and insects and all those kind of things. I believe he said something like when they first did a plant vegetation survey on the Broken Kettle, there was upwards to about 150 different types of species. There are now over 300 different types of vegetation species, plants and vegetation. So I think that's one thing that buffalo do. They bring that dynamics to the landscape, maybe better than cattle. And just little kind of, but they evolved with the land, right? They evolved with the environment. They're a North American species. And again, nothing against cattle. I never, I know a lot of great cattle ranchers and, would never, say that it's a bad thing, but I just feel that buffalo are, better adapted to the environment here.
I'd be interested to know on that soil fertility, cattle versus buffalo. Is there any writing, or has SDSU done anything to? I love the fact that they bring in more diversity, but is there anything written about that I could look into?
The Tallgrass Prairie Reserve in Kansas actually has a paper out, and I could maybe get that out to you all about the increase in
Could you put it in
diversity.
could
I
we look it
possibly
up
can.
in the chat?
Yeah, you could probably, I think it's a Tallgrass Prairie Preserve in Kansas. Yes, you might be able to
Okay.
look that up and see if you can find it. But yes, and SDSU South Dakota State is looking really in depth into that with this Climate Smart grant that they're working with. The regenerative abilities, not just for buffalo or bison, but for cattle as well. What practices can we do as land managers to increase the soil fertility, to increase the carbon sequestration? So we're working with some of the Natural Resources Conservation Service types of projects. One just being good grazing management. Other might be, reintroduction, or I should say, reintroducing native species, native grasses that are better adapted and more diversible to our climate and to our weather. Prescribed burning, that is something that is lacking in a lot of our environments, and was something that was a natural process for the Northern Great Plains particularly, and has been, basically just, not utilized anymore or very little. And that's another thing we'll be working with the Nature Conservancy is trying to, increase that diversity with the use of fire, rotational grazing, and health for the land.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments?
I have a question, Lawrence. Good morning. I'm wondering if many of the tribes are combining the raising of bison with the processing and retail sale of the meat.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. I can't talk to so much to like each tribe, that program that's going on. I know for Pine Ridge, that's a huge issue, particularly after the pandemic when good food sources were hard to find, was trying to develop more local processing facilities where they can get the meat into the stores. Tanka Fund actually did a study about how can we utilize those animals more locally, getting them into the food system versus, as kind of that cattle model, at least in South Dakota, where you raise your animal, you wean it in the fall and you sell it, to a feedlot situation. We're trying to help find better avenues where we'd be able to sell those animals or can retain those animals for the use of harvesting. So a lot of the programs want to do that. We're also working with some of the harvesting facilities or processing facilities, say in Cheyenne River, West Side Meats, bringing in both bison and cattle, and then to sell locally. I seen somebody mentioned Wild Idea with Dan O'Brien and some of the things that he's doing. And, with that the mobile harvesting facility, because it's very difficult. We're watching these roundups now that some of the Nature Conservancy and some of our projects are having. They're difficult for bison and they're difficult for the people. So how can we get those animals to stay on the landscape until we're ready to utilize them? And a mobile harvesting facility is something we are actually looking into.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments?
I might mention, Lawrence, too, something that Tanka Fund is working on, and is our next generation, is our youth programming, our youth institute. We actually have 6 young individuals, those in their late teens, early 20s, that are working an initiative for Tanka Fund to think about what bison restoration and regeneration of the land could look like. They don't like the word institute, even though that's kind of what we kind of penned. They're looking at something more less conventional, a place of study, a place of learning, and not just for tribal youth, but also for all youth, and the next generations to understand these animals. And so I'm excited to see what that study is going to look like, because I know our young people and like a lot of our farmer ranchers in North America, our buffalo caretakers that we're working with are not all young. They are getting into the next season of life as well. And they are very interested in making sure that their sons and daughters and grandchildren and young people come up and take care of these projects that they've invested a lifetime in. So that's exciting with that. And just wanted to mention that that's a big piece of
Sure.
what we want to do. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very important point, and I actually like to get into that a little bit more. What kinds of things are you doing with the youth? Talk a little bit more, if you will, about that project.
Right. Yeah, one of the things we're looking at is employment, for young people to be employed. So we're looking at student internships. We've actually been doing that for the last couple of summers, where we've hired a few young people to come in. We actually encourage some of our project caregivers and projects to hire youth, and we support them. We try to match their funding, what they might have for their youth. We try to match their funding to be able to uh come on and learn everything about, not just about the management, but what are some of the economic revenues beyond just having animals on the landscape. Is it something with leather projects? Is it something with ecotourism? Is it something, what beside just animals and meat can we think about with these animals and the land? And that's what we're encourage them to really dig into. The buffalo were the economy of so many tribal nations for many, many years. And I'm guessing just, of the 500 plus, tribal nations that are here, all of them have some kind of connection to buffalo one way or another, either through trading or being in the areas where buffalo were. So it was more just about, meat. It was about their homes, their clothing, toys, whatever it might be, weapons. So let's think outside the box, and what could that economy be now? We don't necessarily need the hides to make homes anymore, but what else could we do with it? How can we utilize these animals? As they once were so important, how can we make them important? Because many of you may know that on the reservations, not only in South Dakota, but other places, is some of the most poverty-stricken areas in the nation. And so providing jobs, providing opportunities for these young people, not just, and I have to say this about the young men, particularly being able to have them some kind of thing outside of just a formal education, being able to give them the opportunities to work with these animals. And for the young women, the same, but maybe in a little different capacities as well. Clothing and artwork, beautiful artwork made from buffalo products. So that's where we're trying to encourage the youth to think outside that. Of course, the vegetation and the landscape and all of those things, the study of birds and all the animals that and plants that kind of revolve, as bison are a keystone species. What outside of that can we encourage this buffalo economy?
Well, I really appreciate the economic impact, whether it's direct in terms of goods or things that people can sell or make and use. But I'm thinking that the buffalo represents something more than an economic impact to Native people, and I'm wondering what kinds of things are being done, whether it's by you or others, to reestablish that spiritual, emotional connection, as opposed to just seeing them like another kind of cow.
Right. It's not really for me to say too much in depth about that, but I will say that when you see the young people or any people going out, particularly Native people, into the buffalo pasture, that spiritual connection that is there. I think it inspires. I'm going to talk about a young man at the Texas Tribal Buffalo Project, and his mother runs. And he was, got out of high school, wasn't sure what he was going to do. They started the project down there, and now this young man has taken a total, complete turnover, both emotionally, spiritually, and culturally, because he has that connection with those animals, bringing back his tribal ceremonies that have been lost there. And in South Dakota, being able to bring, the meat and the skulls into ceremony, is paramount, because there's that connection. But just sitting in the buffalo pasture and praying there, a lot of the ceremonies happen in some of the buffalo pastures now. You see them popping up all over, or when people go to pray, they go into the buffalo pasture so they can be close to that relationship. It's hard to put what do you want to call it? I don't want to say a price tag. It's hard to, put any kind of a thought into that, just because we just don't know what it's doing. But I believe, and as I've seen over the 25 plus years that I've been working with the animals, the energy that has come from those animals, both on a healing piece, meat being healthier, both on a spiritual healing. It's just hard to put it into words, but there's a real motivation for that. And Ken Burns is going to be having his on PBS. We'll be having his documentary on the bison. I hope everybody can take part of that, because I think it will really, as I understand, it has a real connection to show what the connection between Native people and bison was and can be again.
Can we talk a little bit? Oh, someone had a question?
I had another question.
Sure.
I've raised bottle fed calves before, and I can do that. But if you gave me a young buffalo, I could not do that. So on your family projects, let's say you just give a family one or two, there's all that fencing. I have it right here. Somebody has buffalo, all that high fencing and the management. I mean, a young intern can't do it alone. How do you work out that with a family project?
We've gotten a lot of support from USDA and RCS through some of their contracting program to be able to start replacing some of the cattle fencing with, sturdier buffalo fencing. This has been helpful. Not all of our projects have taken part of that, but there is obviously a cost. I always say once you get the land and the fence up, the buffalo will come. And then the other quote that I've heard from a lot of our project caregivers is, it's not about if the buffalo are going to get out, it's when. And what are you going to do about it? Many stories. So it is something that's a little more interesting than to say if a horse or a cattle got out, but it's something that is a little more. They are wildlife. We consider them wild animals and not domesticated livestock. So you have to take that into consideration. We have had some folks that have been, have raised orphan calves, and it's a trip. They always say, it's been a very good emotional journey for them. Kind of brings it back to the boarding school days when some of the children were taken off the reservations and put in boarding schools. They liken that orphan calf because you're taking that calf because you have to keep it to survive. You take it away from the herd, it's really hard to reintroduce that animal back. But it's doable. It just takes a little more effort. So I want to kind of just maybe talk about that boarding school thing a little bit, treating those animals, as what they are, and treating Native people as who they are is really important connection that a lot of our caregivers talk about as well, making sure that those animals are respectfully taken care of and in a way that they would feel that would, honor their ancestors.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions? If you think of a question, raise your hand or let us know. And because this is an interactive program, we want to make sure that your thoughts and questions get addressed. I'd like to turn for a moment to the processing because I think you've mentioned that a lot of this almost started with the idea of like, well, where do we get this food sustenance? And the buffalo did represent a major source of protein for Native people. So we can't sort of neglect that portion of it. And processing a buffalo is probably a little bit more complicated than processing a goat. So can you talk a little bit about how that happens, where it happens, what are any kind of complications? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the tribal programs and projects we work with are doing their roundups and making the decision about what animals they will, obviously cows and bulls going back into the pasture, but the young animals that are of a harvestable age, what to do with them. So it's a process because you really don't want to do it more than once a year, unlike cattle where you maybe could, round up cattle several times a year. With buffalo, because it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of energy to put towards that. You have to make those decisions then. Do we go to live auction? We have one project that actually does a video auction where then that way he doesn't have to, take them to a sale barn and sell them, but video auction. We do have some that sell, for meat products right off. And then usually what they do is they sort those off and put them in another pasture. And as they're needed, they take them into the processing facility. I think that's one of the hardest things for buffalo managers to find is those processing systems, because obviously not all processing places will take buffalo. there are only, I think, 2 large scale buffalo processing, USDA inspected processing facilities in the country. And and they're set up for bison processing, and meaning that they do it in a way that is less stressful on the animal as it can be. Smaller processing facilities, try to mitigate that as well, but it's a difficult thing. And so that is when we talk about the mobile harvesting system. Is that a way that we can utilize those animals, and they die out on they're born on the pasture, and they're die on the pasture, and partly processed there as well before you would take them into a retail avenue, such as a local meat place or grocery store or anything like that. So there are ways of doing it, making that product, say like a Tonka bar, which Native American Natural Food, they get animals from, and I just seen the question come up. One of the USDA buffalo processing facilities is in near Brush, Colorado. That's where the Tonka bar the meat being facility. I'm trying to think the other one is, I'm not going to say where the other one is because I think it's in Iowa somewhere. So forgive me for not knowing that. But they are set up for that kind of thing. You may find some of the the sticks in the buffalo products, here and there. Tonka bar, as I said, is made as humanely possible as can be. Some of your other knockoff products like that, it's hard to say. I also, when you go into a grocery store to buy buffalo meat, you're not quite sure where it's coming from and what, like any of your meat, it's kind of hard to say. I think the National Bison Association, who we also have a great relationship with, are working on streamlining some of that, where people know, like, this is where this animal is coming from, that you can ensure that it's a good product. You can ensure that this is made humanely. Those kind of things are in the works. But on the individual levels, or they have to kind of figure that out themselves. But we're trying real hard to make some crossroads on, how can we make this a product that people are comfortable with and safe, and know that, because we have to Mark Tilson, our founder, actually said this: to save the species, we need to utilize the species. So that's the connection, and everything in between. I know that's kind of a
Yes.
long answer to that question, but yeah.
And I think that there's actually more to that answer to that question that could be explored. One of the things that you mentioned was in the processing was being processed on the land. Years ago, I went to I think it was on Cheyenne Reservation, that they had a trailer that had been custom made for them and custom made for buffalo processing. Is that trailer still out there? Are they still utilizing that?
I think they are, and I believe they are. I'm not sure. That was kind of the predecessor to the mobile slaughter system. And Fred
Yeah,
Jabray
this
was
was a it was a mobile thing.
mobile. Yeah, and as I understand, it didn't move very well because it was too big. So I think what they did was stationize it there. But they did what they ended up doing was making a pasture behind the facility, and they would bring those young animals into that pasture and then process them, which wasn't quite what they wanted to do. But because of the amount of water you needed to process an animal, and it was a little bit too big for being too mobile, they decided to do that. And they were bringing animals, and then letting the animals kind of, graze and be there until they were ready for harvesting. So it wasn't, I can't say if it's still going, but I thought it was. I think they processed quite a lot of animals there as well. But it was the predecessor to this mobile slaughter unit. Intertribal Buffalo Council just got a small processing facility, and can be USDA inspected. So basically, you can harvest the animal and quarter the animal, and then take it to another processing facility like Wild ID does, and making the retail cuts or using some of the trim for maybe some jerky and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I believe it's still there, and it's a great idea. Again, because of the stress of moving these animals around on them and on the people that manage them. I think there's a lot of great ideas out there to make it less stressful and a lot more humane.
Well, I just want to take a moment here to point everyone to the chat and remind you that there's if you look down at the bottom of the chat, there's something that looks like a pencil, a face, a piece of paper, and then right next to that are three little dots. If you click on those little dots, the three little dots, if you click on those, you can actually save the chat, which will include some links and some of the comments that people are putting online that you can go back and reflect. It'll save, you can reflect on those. It'll save it to your desktop or wherever your things get saved to, download folder or whatever. I'd like to go back now to the processing. When I was studying the meat industry and what was how meat was utilized from making little cow babies all the way up to products. One of the things that stood out to me was how much all of the parts of the beef were being utilized. How much and the whole goal of the meat industry at that time was nothing escaped except the spirit. Everything else was utilized. And since that time, I just because of my connection with some chefs, I've learned, for example, that there is a market for buffalo fat, particularly the fat around the kidneys and stuff like that, for baking. It makes an exceptional fat, superior to pork or the other things. And I'm just wondering, not necessarily about the buffalo fat per se, but as an indicator, how much of the whole animal is being utilized, and can you give us some unique ways that they're being utilized?
Tragically, I have to say that the buffalo is not being utilized as it could. The industry for the hides and the byproducts and even the intestinals and things like that are not at the level of what cattle production is at. And I've been at this for a long time, and unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of movement. I mean, a lot of thought. I know people are thinking about it, but the thought to be able to get these things. And one of it is because there are more cattle processed every day than there are buffalo. and at least in the United States. I don't know if that includes Canada as well, but so that's one process where they're the money, what to do with it, over the years, trying to have people think about just the hide alone, the utility. And I was just watching something last night. I think it was on the Ken Burns movie about, why were the buffalo slaughtered, was because that hide is a lot thicker and tougher than cattle hide and was used for conveyor belts in the industrial Europe. When Europe was becoming industrialized. Can we think of other products of this extremely beautiful leather that could be developed? What else can we, think about? And in terms of, like the buffalo fat it's yellow. And so some people think it's rancid because when you think about fat and it looks yellow, you think it's bad. Actually, that's because it's full of omega-3, fatty acids, not unlike fish, and full of it, and so healthy for you. And so not only can you utilize that for cooking, but also a lanolin, not unlike sheep, that you use off the wool of sheep. What can we, that's where the industry is lacking. And it's not because of a lack of thought or people thinking about it. I think it's just a lack of making it economically feasible where people can actually take some of those products and actually making some kind of economic gain from it. I've known people that have taken some of the bones and, smoked them for, for dogs, and for some of the canine animals because it's a really healthy. What can we do for the marrow in the bones? I mean, that is so healthy. The elders used to, and still some do, crack open the bones, and, the marrow is so healthy for you within those bones. What other things can we think about in terms of the, all of that? I know some people that utilize the horn, the horn caps for jewelry and for eating utensils, which is something that was done in the past. Can we, that's where I think we're lacking in the industry greatly, is that we're trying to find the economic gains. So it's a tragedy actually, because there's a lot of those pieces of the buffalo that are going into the landfills and that are not being utilized.
That might be an area that you can challenge young people, even in grammar school, because sometimes those fresh looks at things and those ideas that kids have because they don't know about gravity yet. So it's like to challenge them to find things. And I think it should include something more than meat and jewelry. There are other things that, for example, if you take cattle, many people don't know that linoleum often involves the fat from cattle. They don't know that, let's say that hair in the part of the ear, they cut off the hair on the internal part of the ear that makes some of the most expensive paintbrushes that you can buy for art. There are all kinds of things like that, the hooves, all of those kind of, you make gelatin from hooves. And they don't have to be copycat products.
No.
But maybe that's where the science is. And that's where I think we sell science short with young people, because we try to we introduce it as something that's nobody can do except if you have a pointed head. Well, lots of people can do it. You just have to be curious. And so it just seems like to me that's an opportunity for young people to become more challenged, as to what they could do with a buffalo, which might require a little bit different thinking about what kids are, but still, anyway, it's out there.
Right. I agree. I agree totally with you. I know that our young people will take us into the next generation with better ideas and more vision maybe than we've had in the past, something to do with the wool, or even, as the technology grows, we were looking at how can we engage young people in technology, is having some virtual games to go into a buffalo pasture. And what do you do? We were trying to think any way we can engage young people to think about these animals and what not, on a spiritual, cultural level, but also in just a ways of thinking. So I'm totally with you on that. Hopefully they can come up with some ideas.
I have
even something like
one more quick question.
Go ahead, Vic.
All tribes don't have the buffalo for their spiritual whatever, because they lived in an area where they didn't have buffalo. Is that correct?
Yes. I would say, like in the Northwest, it was mostly, a fish culture, salmon culture. Different areas were different, but it's kind of phenomenal. Like when you talk, there was a lot of trading that went, years ago between the tribal nations, and it was greatly, so you look down at the Southwest, a lot of our Pueblo people down there have a connection to buffalo. Even in some of the tribes, and the crazy thing about it was, and we think about buffalo being a plains animal, actually there's records of probably tribal people using buffalo all across North America, maybe except for the heart of the deserts, like in Nevada and things like that. There's evidence of them being in Florida. There's evidence of them being and not saying that was all their icon, their spirit animal, but it seemed to play a great role in a lot of the tribal not food sources and spiritual connection, for sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was actually wondering how it became their symbol, and was it for all tribes? I mean, do they trace it back to where do they trace the buffalo back in their spiritual awareness?
Mm.
Just curious about that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, the creation stories that I've heard from particularly the Lakota and some of those others that are deeply connected with them, it was a avenue of, evolution and evolving together from the very beginning. So, it was like for the Lakota people, it was like, and Nakota, it was like this, they walked, they grew, they were always connected, as one, as relatives. So probably from time immemorial, but probably most people would say.
Thank you.
We're coming up on the end of our show, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the cuisine and what's, we talked about processing, we're talking about the meat, but is anyone teaching people, is anyone exploring something about how to prepare it, the different cuts? Is anyone talking about like, well, if you did a buffalo yourself, if you slaughtered a buffalo yourself, how do you part it out most efficiently? Is anyone talking to
Yes.
children and or even adults about that? Where can people go to learn about how to fix buffalo meat other than a buffalo burger?
Right. Great question. And Lisa and Arlo Ironclad, at least locally for us, are great resources. They can take a harvest of buffalo and have it quartered and slaughtered in a cooler within, depending on the size and how much help they had, within a few hours. So they're teaching that, but they're also teaching different ways of utilizing that meat as well. They're just one source. I know there's some other folks like Linda Black Elk up in Standing Rock and a few others. But I think the point is that you're making is, yeah, being able to use, like, how do you make lung soup? How do you, make what we call taniga, cleaning out the intestines? A lot of people call it, oh, I'm trying to think what modern name for that is, but making it out of soups and things like that. But also just learning to cook it correctly. It's not like beef. It a lot of it lacks the fat within the muscles. So usually I always say slower and longer is the way to do it. And as much moisture as you can contain in that. Like there's a few people that will do their buffalo roast in the ground, with coals. And that was how is like many years ago, a long time was done, probably with in the ground with rocks and things like that. Now our modern consume, like Chef Sean Sherman. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him. He is actually from the Pine Ridge Reservation in near Batesland, but I think he has restaurants now in Minnesota, teaching young people how to cook this, new chefs to cook these. Sintigaliska University on the Rosebud Reservation is looking into a culinary school, not just to cook buffalo meat, but all kinds of different traditional foods, harvestable foods from the land. So I think there's some models. I think there's a lot of uh, inroads to that. It's a good way to end this because I think food's important to everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of these culinary schools that are going to advance that idea.
Thank you so much, Trudy, for joining us today. And I want to remind everyone before we click off here in a few seconds that you can get some of those links and get some of those ideas right off the chat by clicking on the three little dots. They're not red, they're black. And then we'll hope that you'll enjoy some buffalo meat and well wishes on the project. And we hope we can see the buffalo back.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage everybody to go to our website. We have a lot of great information there. We have some great stories and that kind of thing. So please take a look and join our newsletter as well, if you would. Thank you. I really
Thank you,
appreciate your
everyone.
time. Yeah,
You
thank
bet.
you.
Thank you. Appreciate yours. Thank you. We'll see everyone next time next week, same time, same station.